The levies won't hit until next week, but one key economic partner is facing an increased import tax today. The White House slapping Canada with a 35% tariff.
President Donald Trump has officially signed an executive order imposing a 35% tariff on a wide range of Canadian imports not covered under the USMCA trade deal. This decision, which took effect immediately on August 1st, comes without delay, without exemptions, and without apology. The announcement sends a clear message. The United States is willing to apply maximum economic pressure, even on its closest allies, when national interests are at stake. While Trump frames this move as a defense of American fairness and sovereignty, Canada sees it as unjustified punishment. So what's really driving this tariff hike, and what does it mean for both sides of the border?
These reciprocal tariffs on many nations worldwide. But remember, he has been striking deals with some of these nations. Most recently, yesterday, South Korea. We also got this from the White House moments ago. They say today the president signed an executive order increasing the tariff on Canada. Today, the president signing an executive order increasing the tariff on Canada from 25 to 35%, with the higher tariff set to go into effect at midnight tonight.
Since re-entering the White House in 2025, President Trump has wasted no time reactivating his signature America First trade strategy. Within just 4 months, the administration has targeted over 70 trading partners with revised tariffs or new negotiations. Canada, despite being one of America's oldest and largest trade allies, now finds itself in Trump's crosshairs. The White House justifies the 35% tariff on 2 grounds. First, Canada's alleged failure to stem the northbound flow of fentanyl and other illicit drugs, which Trump has labeled a national emergency. Second, what Trump calls unfair agricultural tariffs, accusing Canada of imposing duties of up to 200% on U.S. farm products. While other nations, such as Japan, South Korea, and the European Union, rushed to strike provisional deals, Canada did not. For Trump, the message is simple. No deal means consequences. This isn't just a tariff, it's a show of force.
National Emergency Economic Powers Act to address, among other things, the public health crisis caused by fentanyl and illicit drugs flowing across the northern border into the United States. So, the Trump administration says Canada has failed to cooperate in curbing the ongoing flood of fentanyl and other illicit drugs, and has retaliated against the United States for the president's actions to address this unusual and extraordinary threat to the United States, saying, in response,
some over 200%, and they've been treating our farmers very badly. They've been treating our country very badly for years. And look, we like Canada. I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada. But
the newly announced tariff applies exclusively to Canadian products not protected by USMCA, directly targeting industries such as lumber and building materials, automotive parts, industrial components. Speaking from the White House, Trump declared, "They've been treating our farmers very badly. We love Canada, but they've been very poorly led. All we want is fairness." Legally, the move is grounded in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, a law allowing the president to take action during national emergencies. In this case, the administration argues that the flow of fentanyl from Canada poses a public health threat, one that justifies punitive economic measures. It's also notable that this 35% tariff comes on top of an earlier 25% rate, pushing Canada into a separate category of trade partners facing maximum penalties. More than a tax, this is a political lever designed to extract change or provoke reaction.
Own best customer, creating more well-paying careers at home as we strengthen and diversify our trading partnerships throughout the world. We can give ourselves more than any foreign government can ever take away. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand joins us from the White House with more.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney responded with resolve but restraint. On social media, he stated, "Canadians will be our own best customer. We'll create more high-paying jobs at home and diversify our trading partnerships across the globe." The underlying message, Canada won't be cornered. While Ottawa has not yet retaliated, the administration's claim regarding fentanyl trafficking has been sharply disputed. Canadian officials point to data suggesting less than 1% of fentanyl entering the U.S. originates from their territory. Still, Carney's response avoids inflammatory rhetoric. The strategy appears to be buying time while signaling a willingness to pivot, economically and diplomatically. That said, pressure is growing inside Canada for the government to defend domestic industries and reduce reliance on a volatile U.S. market.
Trade war using aggressive tariffs to strong-arm countries into better trading practices, all while avoiding major inflation.
For the United States, this move offers political upside, at least in the short run. Trump reinforces his commitment to American farmers and manufacturers, particularly in battleground states. It also underscores his readiness to act unilaterally, even against close allies. However, there are risks. Higher prices for consumers and manufacturers that depend on Canadian imports. Supply chain disruptions for U.S. companies, especially in
Trump's commitment to take back America's economic sovereignty by addressing the many non-reciprocal trade relationships that impact foreign relations, threaten our economic and national security, and disadvantage American workers here. So had to get that in.
Trump's 35% tariff on Canada is more than a retaliatory measure. It's a bold assertion of power, one designed to reshape behavior, redefine alliances, and rewrite the rules of global commerce. But boldness cuts both ways. If Canada pushes back and or simply moves on, the U.S. risks losing not just a trade partner, but a strategic ally. The bigger gamble? That other nations are watching.
Bastian, so I guess Switzerland, they tried their best. The president tried her best. She went to Washington, even to meet with the Secretary of State, to try to bring that tariff rate down. But no, 39% rate now going into effect.
In the early hours of the morning in New York, a decisive shift rippled through global trade corridors. The United States imposed a staggering 39% tariff on Swiss industrial exports, a rate more commonly reserved for developing nations like Laos or Lesotho, not for one of the world's most sophisticated economies. This marks the steepest tariff President Donald Trump has ever levied on an industrialized country, and it came despite a last-ditch diplomatic mission by Switzerland's president to Washington just days earlier. The Swiss leader's trip to the U.S. Capitol had been a high-stakes gamble. The mission: convince America's top brass, including the Secretary of State, to roll back Trump's tariff decision or at least soften its impact. The talks were cordial, but ultimately fruitless. By the time the president's plane touched down on U.S. soil, it was already clear that Washington's stance was immovable. Trump's America First trade doctrine, anchored in the belief that other nations have long exploited U.S. markets, left little room for exceptions, even for a country with Switzerland's reputation for neutrality and fair dealing. What makes this episode particularly telling is the Swiss approach to diplomacy. In Bern, political culture is rooted in a simple but steadfast principle: a promise once made must be kept. This ethic shaped the president's refusal to bend to what she saw as transactional politics, offering verbal concessions or flashy commitments to win temporary relief. According to those close to the talks, the White House made it clear that goodwill gestures alone would not suffice. Trump wanted binding pledges, including potentially large-scale investments or policy shifts favorable to U.S. industries. In contrast, Switzerland offered no such promises. The president's stance was firm: agreements should be based on mutual respect and grounded in realistic, deliverable commitments. This put her at odds with Trump's negotiation style, which often involves extracting public declarations of support, then using those as leverage in later dealings. By declining to sing to him whatever he wants to hear, as one observer put it, the Swiss president knowingly risked returning home empty-handed. And did. For Trump, the tariff move was not only about Switzerland. It fits a broader pattern of shock and awe trade tactics, designed to force trading partners into rapid concessions. In recent months, companies like Apple have raced to promise domestic investments and job creation in order to maintain favor with the administration. Such pledges, whether ultimately fulfilled or not, carry political value for Trump's base and reinforce his narrative of reclaiming economic control. But the Swiss leader's refusal to play along underscores a fundamental clash of values. Where Washington sees leverage and political theater, Bern sees an erosion of credibility. The result: a diplomatic stalemate that could stretch on for months. The immediate fallout was swift. Within hours of the tariff taking effect, the Swiss franc wobbled against the dollar, and exporters began calculating the likely damage to one of Europe's most export-reliant economies. Industries ranging from precision machinery to pharmaceuticals now face sharply higher costs to sell in the U.S. market, threatening margins and potentially jobs. As the Swiss president's plane makes its descent into Bern, an emergency meeting of the federal government has already been announced for this afternoon, European time. The agenda remains undisclosed, but the urgency is unmistakable. Until now, Switzerland had publicly maintained that it would not resort to countermeasures, favoring dialogue over retaliation. Yet the political pressure is mounting. Domestic industry leaders are clamoring for a response, opposition parties are warning against perceived weakness, and the public mood is shifting toward a more defensive posture. Whether Bern holds to its patient, rules-based strategy or pivots toward stronger measures will be a defining moment for Swiss foreign policy. And for the Trump administration, the outcome will serve as another test of whether hardline economic tactics yield quick wins or sow the seeds of deeper resistance among America's long-standing partners. The world watching closely will see in the coming weeks whether this is merely the opening move in a high-stakes negotiation or the start of a protracted and potentially damaging trade standoff between two nations that, until now, have prided themselves on mutual respect and pragmatic cooperation. As the Swiss president's motorcade winds through the streets of Bern toward the federal palace, the mood in the capital is a mix of disbelief and quiet urgency. For decades, Switzerland has navigated the turbulent waters of global politics by standing apart, politically neutral, economically engaged, and meticulously pragmatic. This formula has allowed it to act as mediator in conflicts, a haven for diplomacy, and a trusted partner in trade. Now, with the United States imposing its most severe tariff against an industrialized nation in recent history, that model is under its most serious stress test in years. The emergency cabinet meeting convened this afternoon is not merely symbolic. Inside those wood-paneled halls, ministers are grappling with a narrow set of unappealing choices. Retaliation in kind, matching Washington's tariffs on American goods, would be a break from Swiss tradition, and it risks provoking an escalation that could harm the country's export-driven economy. On the other hand, doing nothing risks signaling weakness, emboldening Washington and perhaps other trade partners to extract even more concessions in the future. Sources close to the government suggest the immediate priority will be damage control for Swiss industry. High on the agenda, targeted relief for exporters, potential subsidies to offset the new U.S. tariffs, and a push to expand sales into other markets, particularly in Asia and the Middle East. There is also talk of quietly reaching out to allies in the European Union, Canada, and Japan to form a coalition against what they see as America's increasingly unpredictable trade posture. Trump's decision to lump Switzerland's tariff rate into the same category as small, developing economies like Laos and Lesotho has caused particular outrage. For Swiss officials, the comparison is more than insulting, it's economically dangerous. Being bracketed with such countries in trade classifications could influence other nations' perception of Swiss competitiveness and stability. Back in Washington, the administration's justification is straightforward, if blunt. Switzerland, like many of America's partners, has allegedly benefited from trade imbalances that Trump argues hurt U.S. workers. White House aides have pointed to the U.S. trade deficit with Switzerland, driven in large part by imports of pharmaceuticals, machinery, and luxury goods, as evidence that reciprocity is needed. For Trump, these tariffs are a means to force other nations to the table on his terms. However, the real measure of success for this strategy is not immediate economic gain, but political optics. Trump's supporters view the move as proof that he is willing to take on any nation, ally or not, in the pursuit of what he calls fair deals. The image of a president unafraid to slap punitive tariffs on one of the world's wealthiest countries reinforces the narrative of strength that has defined his second term's economic messaging. But in Switzerland, the public reaction is more complex. While some business leaders express quiet hope that the pressure will spur faster trade negotiations, the prevailing sentiment among citizens is one of indignation. Swiss newspapers are running editorials questioning whether their country's careful neutrality still provides any shield in the modern era of geopolitics. Political commentators note that in refusing to make hollow promises to Trump, commitments that may have won a reprieve but would later be politically costly, the Swiss president has reinforced her credibility at home, even if the economic fallout is severe. Diplomatic channels remain open, but the tone is frosty. Washington has not closed the door to future talks, but insiders describe the U.S. position as a prove-it stance. Switzerland must present concrete offers, whether in the form of new investment pledges, procurement deals favoring American companies, or other tangible concessions before any rollback of the tariffs will be considered. This is where the philosophical divide is sharpest. For Byrne, bending to such demands risks undermining its independent decision-making and could set a precedent for future coercion by larger powers. For Trump's White House, it is simply how the game is played. A transaction in which everyone walks away with something, so long as the U.S. comes out ahead. In the broader geopolitical context, the standoff is being watched closely by other nations that have also faced Trump's tariff threats. If Switzerland, with its stable governance and strong economy, is unable to secure relief without caving to U.S. terms, it may discourage others from resisting American trade pressure. Conversely, if Byrne holds its ground and manages to negotiate a favorable settlement, it could embolden other governments to adopt a similar strategy. For now, the Swiss government's restraint, its refusal to announce immediate countermeasures, may be a calculated move. Officials could be buying time to assess the true economic impact, gauge political pressure, and wait for a more opportune moment to re-engage with Washington. Yet patience has limits, and as each day passes under the new tariff regime, industries will feel the strain more acutely. The coming weeks will reveal whether this is a passing storm in the long history of U.S.-Swiss relations, or the beginning of a new era in which even America's most trusted partners find themselves treated not as allies, but as competitors in an unforgiving global marketplace.